Welcome everyone to the channel. Imagine waking up one morning, opening your window, and instead of hearing the familiar sound of traffic outside, you hear a deep, distant rumble, like thunder breathing. The ground trembles softly. Across the sky, enormous dark shapes glide between skyscrapers. At the end of the street, where the city park should be, a creature as tall as a 3-story house is slowly lowering its head to drink from the lake. And the most frightening thing is not that it exists. The most frightening thing is that it is not strange to this world at all. It is part of history, part of nature, part of the civilization that humanity was forced to build beside it. If dinosaurs had never gone extinct, Earth would not simply be another version of our planet. It would be a completely different world. A world where humans never truly stood alone at the top of the food chain. A world where forests did not only hide deer, wolves, or bears, but predators taller than buses. A world where the greatest question would not be how humanity came to dominate nature, but whether humanity could survive long enough to build civilization at all. In our world, about 66 million years ago, a gigantic asteroid struck Earth, tearing a deep wound into the planet's surface and throwing dust, ash, and toxic gases into the atmosphere. Sunlight was blocked. Plants began to die. Food chains collapsed. The giant creatures that had ruled the land for more than 160 million years vanished, leaving behind an empty throne for small, warm-blooded animals hiding in the darkness. Among them were our ancestors. In other words, the rise of humanity was not only the result of evolution, it was also the result of catastrophe. We are the heirs of a throne that was suddenly left vacant. But what if that asteroid had never fallen? What if the skies at the end of the Cretaceous period had remained clear? What if the ancient forests had continued to shake beneath the footsteps of Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, Hadrosaurus, and massive predators? What if Tyrannosaurus rex had never become a skeleton in a museum, but had continued to evolve, continued to hunt, continued to reproduce, and continued to dominate vast regions of the planet? Then the history of life would have turned down a darker, grander, and far more terrifying path. The first thing we must understand is that dinosaurs were not frozen monsters of the past. They were not mindless hunting machines that only knew how to roar and tear things apart. They were an incredibly diverse group of animals, highly adapted, with complex behaviors. Some lived in herds. Some cared for their young. Some possessed sharp senses, astonishing speed, and bodies refined by tens of millions of years of evolution. If they had not gone extinct, they would not have remained in the forms we know today. They would have changed. And after 66 million years, the descendants of dinosaurs might have become stranger, smarter, and more dangerous than anything we have ever imagined. Picture the tropical rainforests of South America. Not only jaguars and giant anacondas lived there, but theropod predators that evolved into rainforest hunters, slimmer in build, covered in dark feathers, with eyes shining in the shadows, moving so lightly they almost make no sound. They would not need to be as large as T-Rex to be terrifying. They would only need to be as intelligent as crows, as coordinated as wolves, and armed with claws as long as knives. In that world, every forest would no longer be a place where humans could survive with a blade, fire, and courage alone. It would be a living maze where humans had to learn silence, learn to read footprints, and learn to recognize the moment when birdsong suddenly disappeared. In Africa, the vast grasslands might not belong to lions. Instead, they could be the territory of fast-running carnivorous dinosaurs, pack hunters chasing smaller herbivorous dinosaurs across golden savannas. The hoofed animals we know today might never have flourished to the same extent because they would have had to compete with countless herbivorous dinosaurs that had already existed before them. Elephants, rhinos, giraffes, zebras, and buffalo might still appear, but they would no longer be the only icons of the wild. They would live in a world where the shadows of ancient creatures still covered the horizon. And in North America, where today there are modern cities, wide highways, and peaceful suburbs, it might once have been a land where post-Cretaceous dinosaurs continued to evolve through ice ages, climate change, and the shifting of continents. Large dinosaurs might have had to shrink to adapt to colder climates. Some would develop thick feathers and live in herds across snowy plains, like prehistoric ghosts walking through white storms. Others would become cold region predators, hiding among pine forests, their bodies covered in silver-gray plumage, their breath smoking beneath the winter moon. In such a world, the idea of monsters in the woods would no longer belong to legend. It would be part of the survival map. And then the biggest question begins to appear. In a world like that, would mammals ever have had the chance to rise? If dinosaurs still dominated the land, our ancestors might have remained trapped in the darkness. Small mammals might have continued living at night, digging burrows, eating insects, hiding beneath tree roots, never having the opportunity to expand into large, intelligent primates adapted to daylight. Without the ecological opening created by the mass extinction, the path toward humanity might have been blocked from the very beginning. In the most extreme version of this world, humans simply would not exist. But suppose that, somehow, mammals still found cracks in evolution's fortress. Perhaps they developed on isolated islands where large dinosaurs could not reach. Perhaps some small primates lived in the trees, avoiding predators on the ground, gradually developing skillful hands, sharp vision, strong memory, and complex social lives. Perhaps, after millions of years, humans still appeared. But not as conquerors of the planet. We would emerge as a fragile species, born in fear, raised under brutal pressure, and forced to become far more intelligent, simply to survive the night. In that world, fire would not merely be a tool. Fire would be humanity's first wall. When our ancestors learned to create fire, they were not only driving away darkness or cooking food, they were drawing a small circle between themselves and ancient jaws. Every night around the flames would be a psychological battle. Out there, in the darkness, there might be eyes reflecting red light. There might be very slow, very heavy footsteps, approaching, then stopping. Children would be taught from the very beginning, do not leave the firelight. Do not go alone. Do not trust the silence of the forest. Human language might also have developed differently. The first words might not only have been names for food, family, or tools, but alarm calls for different kinds of dinosaurs. A short cry to warn of small pack predators. A long whistle to signal that a giant creature was moving near the water. A hand gesture to tell everyone to lie down because a massive flying reptile was circling above. Humanity's earliest legends would not need to invent dragons, monsters, or divine beasts. They would be born from things that truly lived outside the cave. When humans began to settle down, agriculture would become a terrifying challenge. In our world, farming changed everything. Humans stopped wandering, built villages, created food surplus, and from that came cities, kingdoms, and empires. But in a world with dinosaurs, wheat fields and cornfields would not only attract birds, rodents, or wild animals. They could attract herds of herbivorous dinosaurs, weighing several tons, capable of destroying an entire harvest in a single afternoon. Humanity's first walls might not have been built to keep out invading armies, but to keep ancient creatures from walking into the fields. Cities in this world would take a different shape. They might rise on cliffs, rocky islands, plateaus, or places with natural defensive advantages. Walls would be higher, gates would be thicker, moats would be wider. Every entrance would be designed not only to stop humans, but to stop creatures capable of smashing through a house. Trade routes would not follow the most convenient paths, but the paths with the fewest dinosaur tracks. Ancient human maps would not only mark rivers, mountains, and deserts, they would also mark forbidden zones, places where predators bred, where dinosaur herds migrated, where no one returned after the rainy season. Religion and mythology would also take another form. In our world, dragons appear in many cultures, even though no one has ever seen a real dragon. But in this world, dragons would not be imaginary. Giant creatures with scales, feathers, horns, claws, jaws, and thunderous calls would live just beyond the borders of villages. Humans would worship them, fear them, hunt them, sacrifice to them, and tell stories about them around the fire. A carnivorous dinosaur appearing on a hill might be seen as an omen of war. A herd of herbivores passing through a valley might be interpreted as a sign that the seasons were about to change. Their bones would become sacred relics. Their footprints, hardened in mud, would become pilgrimage sites. Ancient kings might not boast of killing lions, but of surviving the hunt of a fully grown theropod. War would change as well. At first, humans might try to avoid dinosaurs, but as civilization developed, ambition would appear. If some herbivorous dinosaurs could be domesticated, they would become symbols of power, far beyond war elephants. Imagine an ancient army marching onto a battlefield, not only with horses and carts, but with living creatures covered in natural armor, massive bodies, long horns, and footsteps that shake the ground. A city-state capable of controlling large dinosaurs could become a superpower of the ancient world. Fortresses would have to be redesigned to withstand the power of living beasts. Dinosaur trainers would be seen as shamans, generals, and scientists all at once. But carnivorous dinosaurs would almost certainly not be easy to domesticate. They are not horses, they are not dogs, they are not falcons. Some small, intelligent, pack-living species might be partly controlled by humans, like hunting with falcons or hounds. But larger predators would always be a risk. The history of that world would surely contain famous disasters. An arena torn open, a king killed by the very beast that symbolized his power, a city opening its gates for a victory parade only to be crushed when war dinosaurs panicked. The greater the power, the more terrible the price. By the modern age, if humans had survived everything and built industry, the world would be both familiar and strange. We might still have electricity, airplanes, satellites, the internet, cities, and science. But everything would be designed with the awareness that humans are not the largest creatures out there. Highways might have enormous fences and migration warning systems. Airports would need to account for large, flying species that could collide with aircraft. National parks would not merely be tourist destinations, but strictly controlled zones where every visitor must accept survival protocols. Safaris would no longer mean watching lions from a jeep. They would mean observing creatures as tall as buildings from armored bunkers. Great cities might become technological fortresses. Thermal cameras, patrol drones, seismic sensors, deterrent sound systems, and electromagnetic fences would all be used to hold the line between civilization and wilderness. In suburbs near forests, children would not be allowed to walk home alone. Road signs would not only warn of deer crossings, they might warn of giant herbivorous dinosaurs moving in herds. Evening news might report that a road had been closed because tracks from a large predator were found near a residential area. and then a major ethical conflict would arise. If dinosaurs had never gone extinct, they would not be monsters resurrected from a laboratory. They would be native animals of Earth. They would have the right to exist before humans ever did. As human populations grew, as forests were cut down, as cities expanded, conflict between humans and dinosaurs would become one of the greatest political, ecological, and moral issues on the planet. Do we have the right to destroy a predator simply because it is dangerous to us? Do we have the right to occupy valleys through which dinosaur herds have migrated for millions of years? Who is the true invader? Humans, or the creatures that were there long before our ancestors learned to stand upright? In that world, conservation would take on an almost epic character. Biologists would not only track whales, tigers, or elephants, they would follow the last living bloodlines of ancient empires. A scientist might spend an entire lifetime studying a herd of herbivorous dinosaurs migrating through the Arctic. A team of rangers might sacrifice themselves to stop poachers from stealing horns, claws, eggs, or skin from rare species. Criminal organizations might traffic dinosaur eggs on the black market. Billionaires might want to own private reserves. Countries with many rare dinosaur species would possess an incredible form of soft power, as if they held the living wonders of prehistory. Science would also develop differently. We would not need to dig up fossils to guess the color, behavior, or calls of dinosaurs. We could observe them directly. But that would also take away part of their romance. In our world, dinosaurs are magnificent ghosts of the past. And the more distant they are, the more they fascinate us. In that other world, they would be dangerous neighbors, management problems, cultural symbols, traffic hazards, research subjects, childhood fears, and sources of national pride. They would no longer belong only to museums. They would belong to every morning, every forest, every sky. But there is an even stranger possibility. If some branches of dinosaurs continued evolving intelligence for 66 million years, could they have developed a different kind of civilization? Not necessarily cities, writing, or technology like humans, but perhaps complex packs, sound symbols, layered hunting strategies, generational memory, and simple tool use. Imagine a small, feathered dinosaur with flexible hands, sharp eyes, a large brain, living in the rainforest and passing knowledge down through generations. It would not need to build pyramids to become an evolutionary rival to humans. It would only need to be smart enough to learn, remember, cooperate, and adapt. Then the story would no longer be about humans living in a world of dinosaurs. It would be about two forms of intelligence sharing one planet. One side builds cities of steel and glass. The other reads wind, scent, vibrations in the ground, and forest sounds in ways humans could never fully understand. One side has satellites in orbit. The other has instincts sharpened over tens of millions of years. And between them, there would always be a fragile boundary: curiosity, fear, conflict, and respect. Perhaps the most important thing to consider is this: if dinosaurs had not gone extinct, humans would be more humble. We would not so easily believe that this planet was made for us. Every city would be a bold declaration in the middle of the wild. Every road through a forest would be a negotiation with nature. Every child growing up would know that the world outside had never been fully tamed. And perhaps that fear would make humanity different, more cautious, more connected to community, more respectful of darkness, and less deluded about its own power. In our world, dinosaurs vanished, and humanity was given the chance to become the dominant species. But the price of that chance was an enormous emptiness in the history of life. We grew up among fossil bones, museum models, and questions that will never be fully answered. We look into the skull of T-Rex and wonder what its roar truly sounded like.
We look at fossil footprints and imagine how the ground once trembled. We create movies.
We look at fossil footprints and imagine how the ground once trembled. We create movies, stories, games, and fantasy parks because deep inside, humanity is still haunted by a world we missed. If dinosaurs had never gone extinct, perhaps we would never have had the chance to dream about them. We would have had to live with them, and that dream would become lore, fences, legends, war, science, fear, and reverence. Earth would no longer be the planet of humans. It would be an ancient stage where the performance never ended, where biological dynasties never truly fell. So perhaps the question, what if dinosaurs had never gone extinct, is not merely a hypothesis about the past. It is a mirror reflecting how fragile our place in nature really is. All it would take is one asteroid not falling, one cosmic moment drifting away from the history we know, and the entire story of humanity might never have been written. No pyramids, no Rome, no cities shining at night, no us sitting here imagining them. Only vast forests, endless plains, roars echoing through the sunset, and a planet still belonging to ancient kings.